Yesterday upon the stair, I met a man who wasn't there. He wasn't there again today. Oh, how I wish he'd go away. When I came home last night at 3, the man was waiting there for me. But when I looked around the hall, I couldn't see him there at all. Go away, don't you come back anymore. Go away, and please, don't slam the door. Last night I saw upon the stair a little man who wasn't there. He wasn't there again today. Oh, how I wish he'd go away. The poem Antigonish by William Hughes Mearns. Written in 1899, this poem about a haunted house in Antigonish, Nova Scotia, Canada, would become the basis for one of American grunge rock band Nirvana's most memorable performances during their MTV Unplugged show in 1993, nearly 100 years after the poem was written. Nirvana frontman Kurt Cobain sang cryptic, haunting, Mearn-inspired lyrics so naturally that a majority of the people who heard it swore the song was a Nirvana original, despite the fact that it had been written 23 years earlier in 1970 and was still regularly played on tour by the massively famous British musician who wrote it. Quote, "Kids that come up afterwards and say, 'It's cool you're doing a Nirvana song,' and I think, 'Fuck you, you little tosser,'" said David Bowie in an interview with Rolling Stone. The title track off Bowie's third album was a massive hit for Nirvana, and before that, it was a European hit for Scottish singer Lulu in 1973, who hit number 3 on the UK singles chart with her version, which featured instrumentals and backing vocals by Bowie and most of Bowie's band. The only person who struggled to have a hit with this song was David Bowie himself. In fact, the entire making of this song and album was a struggle for Bowie and his collaborators. Bowie was preoccupied with his first wife, Angie Barnett, to whom he had just been married, and he was in the middle of changing managers and in constant debate with his fellow band members and record label. The original name of the album, The Metrobolist, a title paying tribute to Fritz Lang's 1927 film Metropolis, was changed at the last minute by Mercury Records, and this was not the only element they saw fit to change. The original album artwork was an illustration made by Mike Weller. It depicted a cowboy with a speech bubble in front of a mental asylum. The speech bubble contained the phrase, "Roll up your sleeves and show us your arms," a pun on record players, guns, and drug use. Although Bowie originally approved the artwork, he later decided that he wanted something else and set up a photo shoot with Keith McMillan, in which Bowie wore a dress designed by Michael Fish. The photos from the shoot caused some upset due to a man being in a dress. And so Mercury Records rejected Bowie's dress photo for the US release, opting for the Weller illustration with the provocative phrase removed. Bowie had his way on the UK release, however, and the image of him lounging in a dress with playing cards scattered in front of him is now iconic. The album was the first to feature Bowie staples Mick Ronson and Woody Woodmansey. Tony Visconti was also heavily involved in the album, playing bass, arranging music, and more. Visconti took issue with Bowie's work during this album, and the two would not work together again for several years. Visconti said this of the process: "The band, sometimes with Bowie contributing guitar, sometimes not, would record an instrumental track which might or might not be based upon an original Bowie idea. Then, at the last possible moment, Bowie would reluctantly uncurl himself from the sofa on which he was lounging with his wife and dash off a set of lyrics." Bowie took issue with Visconti's description of the album making, claiming that the chord changes in the songs were obvious evidence of his critical work during the creation process. The end result of all this struggling, infighting, and reluctance is an album that was initially ignored by critics and now viewed as an incredible hard rock album and the first in a long line of masterpiece David Bowie albums. That's right, today on Cover Me, we're talking about the title track from David Bowie's third studio album, The Man Who Sold the World.
We passed up on the stair. We spoke of was and when, although I wasn't there.
That's right, it's Cover Me, the only podcast that talks about famous songs and their many cover versions and compares them against one another to find out which one we passed upon the stairs. I'm your host as always, Jake Cressy, joined by my gazeless co-host,
Alex Mildenberger.
Alex Mildenberger.
That's my name.
That's you. How's it going, Alex?
It's going all right. I was having some internet problems, but they seem to have subsided for now, so hopefully we can get at least one podcast's length of functioning internet out of this.
Yeah, let's hope so. I'm not helping by writing the longest intro I've written for this podcast.
That was lengthy. I wasn't sure what
when it was going to end.
I mean,
yeah.
you had to read the whole poem, and then there's a whole story, and then you talk about Tony Visconti, because he's a guy.
Because yeah, there's so much that's like important about this album, and I just thought the poem was like a great entry point, and then from there things I think just got out of hand.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of describes, that's like a microcosm of this podcast as a whole.
The things just getting out of hand.
Yeah, like it starts with an idea and then it just kind of goes off somewhere.
Oh, yeah, I will remind you that the first episode we ever recorded of this podcast was like 35 minutes.
Yeah, but I talk for a long time now. I mean,
That's
personally.
we both do. We're just a couple of gabbers.
I mean, we still haven't discussed the song at all, and we're not actually 10 minutes in because the first like 5 minutes is not usable. But
Yeah, but a 5 minute, it's usually like a minute to two. Sometimes I got 3 paragraphs where I'm like, what's up? You know what song this is. It's this song. It was a hit in 1975 or whatever, and then we're in it.
yeah, well, I mean, let's talk about it. Let's talk about the man who sold the world.
Let's do it, Alex. You know this. I know this. It's a great song. It's a great album. Which version of this did you hear first? Did you hear the Nirvana version first, or was the Bowie your first intake?
It was Bowie. Bowie first. I never really listened to Nirvana personally. I knew the name of the song. I didn't know what it was. It was another one of those, like Life on Mars, because there was a lot of Bowie I heard about before I heard it,
Right.
and this was
And much like
one of those classic songs.
Yeah, much like Life on Mars, classic song, great title.
It's
And
very
yeah, just
evocative, right?
very evocative. Yeah, the man who
Like
sold the world.
what does that mean to sell the world?
And
Really?
I'll be honest with every listener, we're not gonna crack that case
Nope.
today.
Nope.
Not even fucking close. But yeah, I had heard the Bowie version first because, like you, I was just estranged from Nirvana for some reason. I think having listened to this cover this week and done our discussion on "Smells Like Teen Spirit," I feel like I really should dive into more Nirvana because I think they are actually a good band. I think Kurt Cobain's an interesting character, but
Yeah, but I know like 5 Nirvana songs, maybe. Like,
yeah, I just feel like so divorced from Nirvana content, and it's very strange.
the
But
90s were always kind of a blind spot of mine, and I didn't really have any way to get into that. Like, we didn't have people around us who were like, hey, check out some of that Nirvana or anything like
yeah,
that.
I had like my oldest sister was a big influence for a lot of music, which is like probably why I got into David Bowie before ever Nirvana. I think she probably was shit talking Nirvana, so that strayed me away from that route. But yeah, nobody was around to be the cool older brother or weird dude on your street who like smokes weed and lends you grunge cassettes. You know, that classic character.
Yeah, totally. We all had one of those,
Yeah.
didn't we?
Well, yeah, who didn't? The neighborhood stoner scamp hanging out with kids who are way too young to be hanging out with them. A classic. Alex, so much
Yeah.
to say about this album. I didn't know that illustration was the original artwork, and I
No,
further didn't know that it had a speech bubble with raunchy text.
No, the first time I saw that image was like this past week because I looked up David Bowie, and I saw, or like 2 weeks ago, and I saw there's a remix version that Tony Visconti did, just 2020,
just last year.
and it has that artwork, and it's called The Metrobolist, and it has the speech bubble, but it's in Spotify, so it's too small to read, so I didn't make anything of it, and I was wondering what the connection between the name and the art were to this album,
Yeah.
and now I know because you told me.
Exactly. Yeah. So Mental Asylum, apparently based on the one that Bowie's half brother was committed.
Right, because he kind of had like a long family history of what's the word I'm looking for? Like psychological
Mental
conditions
illness?
that
Yeah.
would get
Yeah.
people committed.
Yeah, I want to say schizophrenia, but it's been a while since I've read like the Bowie biography.
Yeah, I
that
don't
had a
remember the
few years back.
specifics, unfortunately.
I don't remember. Yeah, he was committed there, and then it has an image of actor John Wayne, or at least the cowboy's based on John Wayne,
Right.
which is itself supposed to be a reference to the track Running Gun Blues.
That makes sense. He is holding a gun, and that song is about shooting people with a gun. A bunch.
Yeah.
The song is
This
actually,
is-
I believe, about post-traumatic stress or something. like that.
Yeah, I believe so. A lot of the songs on this album are about essentially mental illness at some extent, whether it's post-traumatic stress, depression. It seems to be at the heart of this, even though it's not like ever outrightly stated.
Yeah, it gets pretty dark at times. Like some of them, even like She Shook Me Cold, which I don't actually know what it's about specifically, but it sounds more sexual, but like in the name, but then the way it's delivered sounds much more sinister. Um and then other songs like Savior Machine, which is like sci-fi apocalyptic stuff about a machine that kills everyone and might be based on like I have no mouth and yet I must scream or something like that. Like it's that sort
Yeah.
of in that vein of
Yeah, so the
of machines that rule things and
right, this sort
aren't.
of
Yeah.
apocalyptic fiction based on sci-fi, like
Yeah.
technology will eventually kill us to save us kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the lyrics according to Wikipedia are inspired by figures like Aleister Crowley, Franz Kafka, and Friedrich Nietzsche. So those are, I think though you can look at this album as a whole and be like, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so like in terms of the Bowie chronology, it's a very early album. Technically it's his third album.
Mm-hmm.
The first two albums were much more sort of loose in terms of album like cohesion. They were
Yeah,
more kind of collections of singles than anything
that's
else.
right.
And as much as I
And
like his second album, which is sort of called Space Oddity, but also sort of just called David Bowie, it doesn't have the cohesive feeling that The Man Who Sold the World has, for sure.
no. Yeah, and it's just such a like between these two, such a hard right from the very folk rock music
Yeah,
of Space
even
Oddity.
after this into Hunky Dory, like pretty
Mm-hmm.
significant shift from these like much more hard distorted guitars into like Quicksand or
Yeah.
whatever. Or like
Yeah, well,
Kooks. It's so like bubbly.
yeah, a song he wrote for his son, whereas this you have all of this anguish and darkness just compacted into a single album. And one of the reasons some people state for that unity on a lyrical level is actually the last minute approach that Visconti was complaining about. Is that it would be like they're like we have to lay out this track today, like we're gonna mix it, which is what happened with this song and with The Man Who Sold the World. And he was like, all right, I'll fucking knock these out. And so he wrote the lyrics in the reception area of the studio while Visconti was waiting at the mixing console. He quickly recorded the vocals, and Visconti added a flange effect and mixed the track in a few hours. And that was apparently just the standard process for this album. Was like, we have the instrumentals, we just need lyrics. Bowie was like, oh, very well, I will write some lyrics. I don't know why he's one of the Beatles, but they do that. And then, so that's why there is this unity, is just because it was so last minute crunch.
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting method. I think it worked out because I'm a pretty big fan of this album.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
nobody who made it was a fan of the process at the very least. But like in later years, I think both Bowie and Visconti have like gone on record been like, yeah, this album is really like something special. Like it is very
yeah. At the
musically
very
interesting.
least, I mean, I know two things. I know one, um, David Bowie was a fan of the song "The Man Who Sold the World." I've heard him like
Mm-hmm.
introduce it in live albums where he would say like, "This is a really old song that I think kind of had something going here."
Yeah.
To paraphrase heavily. And also The Width of a Circle, the first song in the album. I'm trying to remember the name. There was a David Bowie album that was like less popular songs that he picked that he thought people should listen to. I got out of the library a number of years ago. It had The Width of a Circle on it, and it had Beauty and the Beast on it, and
That's
like
a couple
Always
banger
Crashing the
tracks.
Same Car. Stuff that like weren't necessarily singles. They were maybe a little bit more buried, but he was like, yeah, I dig this one. So he likes at least 2 songs on this album based on what evidence I could find.
And at least that one year, he said that this was for him a better album than Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. At least musically, he was like, "This is much more interesting than the straightforward rock and roll that made up Ziggy Stardust." But
Interesting.
he had such
Yeah.
a long career and talked.
Yeah, if
so
that
much
if that
shit.
was like if that was like Bowie right after Ziggy Stardust, that doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah. Oh yeah. He was very and
He's
he
just
seems
like,
to
hey,
do
fuck
that
this,
after
let's do the next thing. Yeah.
a lot of phases of his music, and he'll either talk down the music itself or the persona he had during that time. I
Mhm.
was reading about the Thin White Duke and how he was like, yeah, it was maybe a little crass because he would just say like pro-fascist shit in interviews and be like,
Yeah,
Hitler
that
was
was
quite all right.
an interesting phase. The fascism one. I believe he did wear a Nazi uniform at one point.
Yeah, I do believe that is true. There was some Nazism connection.
So yeah, that wasn't
Yeah.
great.
With that, let's talk about these lyrics, Alex. I think we're avoiding them a bit because
It's gonna be tough. They're like pretty vague, and even in the descriptions that, like, because I was doing some research, like it is not agreed on what this line means. Like, yeah, because it probably doesn't mean a lot necessarily.
Right.
Maybe
But
it's
the
something
confidence with which people in Genius in other pages will say what this song is about is unlike any other track we've talked about.
Although,
on
and
this show,
people
I
get pretty
feel.
confident about some far out stuff on Genius.
Yes, they do, but here it is just like they're like, this is what there's one of the comments where it's like the man that you're talking about is Jesus Christ. I'm like, how did you get
What?
that?
It's following the breadcrumbs, really.
Yeah, it is some real following the breadcrumbs nonsense.
But like the breadcrumbs are a little bit drugged or
yeah, they're a little bit not there at all.
Oh, speaking of, verse 1, first verse. We passed
Hit me
upon
with
the
it.
stair. We spoke of was and when. Although I wasn't there, he said I was his friend, which came as some surprise. I spoke into his eyes. I thought you died alone a long, long time ago.
Yes. Now, before we dig into these lines specifically, I will give us the one useful piece of information we have here, which is a quote from David Bowie himself, where he says, "I guess I wrote it because there was a part of myself that I was looking for. That song for me always exemplified kind of how you feel when you're young, when you know there's a piece of yourself that you haven't really put together yet. You have this great searching, this great need to find out who you really are." Which, at the very least, I think speaks to who the narrator and this character are, the man who sold the world, and they are ultimately the same person. I think that's a fair assumption.
Yeah, it does seem to me that they're the same person, and the way the song itself delivers it makes that feel ambiguous, because obviously it's a conversation between two people. And excuse me, hang on, all right, I'm good. I was just doing
You good?
I don't know what it's called. It's like I wasn't burping, but I was feeling like a burp.
You're just like,
But there's
little
yeah.
built up.
Little gassy. So it's a conversation between two people, and it's the same person actually, but they pass and they talk about their past, but the person's saying they're talking about a past that didn't exist, and one of them is saying, "Hey, I know you," but the other one doesn't recognize him.
And yeah, he's like, he said I was his friend, and which seems to imply that they had like a healthy relationship that was ongoing. And the narrator's like, well, I'm surprised because I honestly thought this dude was dead.
Yeah, not just dead, but died alone. Which
yeah,
I thought might be like a euphemism for suicide. I wasn't totally sure.
that's definitely possible with the sort of air of this song having mental illness
Yeah,
hanging there. Like, it's definitely a possible interpretation.
but I don't know if there's any basis for that or not. Even like he says, we spoke of was and when, which like, is that a real phrase? Those are just, I mean, that's a past tense word. And a not, what's the tense?
Yeah,
of
it's
when?
not a real phrase that
Yeah.
anyone uses, but I think it is just like we shot the shit about the past.
It seems to make sense.
Because it starts out quite casual, and I think that comes up in verse 2. For the narrator, until a certain point, this is just a casual encounter for him.
Right. And then he's kind of realizing, like, wait a minute,
Yeah.
aren't you dead? Or like, I thought you at least weren't around anymore. And
Yeah,
now
you weren't around.
if it's the same person, I kind of thought of it as, I guess he was thinking about, like in the quote, about
Mhm.
himself, but not necessarily like who he, trying to understand who he was, I guess, more than
Mhm.
anything. So I guess I don't totally understand the connection between that and this idea of like not recognizing yourself. Or maybe it's a question of finding yourself and then not recognizing who you've become or something. Time
Mhm.
is
Yeah,
kind
so
of vague in this song.
yeah, so whether this is like his past self, so literally just like a previous Bowie, a younger Bowie who was different from current Bowie, whether this is a Bowie who went down a different path in life and he's just encountering this idea again perhaps of like what he thought he was going to be, and so it could be like an alternate Bowie, it could be a previous Bowie, it could be a future Bowie, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
or it could simply be a very Fight Club esque interpretation where it's like this one exists still. This person who he thought he was no longer, because there's a point in Fight Club where he's like, "Oh, Tyler's gone." I think like I haven't talked to him in a long time, and then it turns out that he's been there every step of the way, right?
Right, because,
And
yeah. I mean,
yeah, because
spoilers for Fight Club.
yeah, if you haven't seen the
It's
film or
only
read the
been
book,
20 years. Get
but
on
yeah,
that.
whatever this projection is of the narrator, and I'm part of me thinks that perhaps the narrator himself is the projection, but we'll get into that a bit. It's yeah, it is some personal attachment and something that he thought was gone and would not come up again.
Right.
And that's really I think all we can gain from the first verse. It's a
Yes.
surprise encounter with some part of your being.
Yourself. The man who wasn't
Yeah.
there.
Exactly. Like yesterday upon the stair, and this one happens upon the stair as well. So it's very direct in what it's referencing.
Mm-hmm.
It's very clear that the man, whatever he may be, is not like physically present so
He's a
much as he is mentally present. He's
or something.
So we come to the chorus. Oh no, not me. I never lost control. You're face to face with the man who sold the world.
Which seems to be a response to the previous statement. Because
Yeah, so this is
in the
not the
narrative of the
narrator
song, he says,
speaking.
"Oh, I thought you died," which is a weird thing to say, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
like, aren't you? Didn't you die? I'm like,
Yeah,
no,
aren't
no,
you
no, no,
dead?
no,
He's
no,
like, no, not me.
no. Which of course, like you were saying, with the like Fight Club sort of situation where there's sort of two aspects to who you are. Then we're talking about losing control and of, well, just generally saying control, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps then, how do I want to phrase this? I mean, in that interpretation, it's like two aspects controlling the same person and sort of fighting for control. I don't think it's quite that or
Mm-hmm.
anything, but it's kind of like different parts of a person. That was also when I was thinking about it from the like suicide thing, referring again to suicide as losing control, but I don't know.
Right.
That's pretty tenuous.
Right. So instead of, and this might tie into with the man who sold the world, instead of killing himself in the physical sense, he's simply severed ties to reality, right?
Oh, so he's not saying I didn't die. He's saying I never
Mm-hmm.
lost control. It's like I've
Yeah.
still
He's
been
just,
here. Like I was dead, kind of, but that doesn't mean that my impact is gone or something like that.
yeah. And also, to be part of the world and truly exist in it and interact with it is to not be in control to a great extent. So if you remove yourself from the world without ending your life, it's like I'm maintaining control. All it cost me was the world, was everything.
The world.
The world.
Face to face with the man who sold the world. What does it mean to be the man who sold the world?
The world. That is, it is the question. It's provocative. It gets the people going.
Yeah, it's an interesting phrase, and obviously, like, the most literal interpretation of like selling the world to someone. I don't see what that would mean in this context. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but also the sort of continuation of the phrase being the man who sold the world on something, convinced the world that something was true,
Yeah.
and kind of implying that that thing is not true. So that's maybe the control that they're referring
Mm-hmm.
to. It's interesting because at this point there weren't like maybe there were like this is early Bowie, so it's not like we've seen a bunch of characters. Because later
Mm-hmm.
on, particularly in like Scary Monsters, when he'll actually like address this idea that there are many Bowies or many Bowie characters that he's been. But at this point, although he had done quite a few different things, in his sort of artistic endeavors, there weren't. He hadn't done the like kind of selling out of Ziggy Stardust and later. And
Yeah.
I don't
Because
know
at
if
this
this is
point,
just
he's
being
not even
prophetic or what.
famous.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So it is very interesting because some people erroneously attribute it to exactly what you've just talked about, how he had these personas, and they're like, oh well, he was Ziggy Stardust, and this is him talking about how he still is David Bowie, and he's the man who sold the world because he pretended to be Ziggy
Yeah.
Stardust, but that simply can't be true.
But maybe he just had this idea because even I know we talked about it came up last week when we were talking about Wild as the Wind, um, where he would say like, "Oh, I'm not talented. I'm not this talented rock star. I'm just pretending to be a rock star. Like I found this formula and I follow it, and
Hmm.
that makes me a rock star, and people buy it."
Right, and he has a theater background, so he really did seem to approach music from a performance perspective.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, that could also be him just like grabbing onto that idea very early.
Yeah, it may just be
See,
this is kind of like the first or the first that I can think of really exposure of that idea, and I'm sure he had it in his mind before Ziggy Stardust existed.
hmm
And the fact that it happened to work out is just maybe a coincidence.
yeah, maybe, and or just like a heightening of what was present in this, right? 'Cause at a very base level, a performer is not always the person they are on stage.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
and so then for David Bowie, it just happens to be very easy to point that out because you're like, well, after this, he became Ziggy Stardust, and then
Yeah.
like,
It's kind of that like survivorship bias too, because he's saying like, "Oh, I found the formula. Like I just know the
hmm
formula. That's why I can succeed." But he, as far as I can tell, like tried to share that, and other people didn't succeed in the same way he did. So anyway, I'm getting a little bit off topic, but
yeah,
I think it's obvious now that it's not as simple as him following a rock and roll formula.
no, I would agree with that. The other thing I can only say about this one is it again with that sort of Fight Club influence. If we view the person he meets upon the stairs as having, let's say, like certain motivations in life,
Mm-hmm.
because you can do an action and be like, well, I'm not doing it because of this, I'm doing it because of this. So if the narrator had believed that and had been following that sort of path where he's like, I'm not doing music for fame anymore, let's say, I don't think that's Bowie's reason, but he's like, I'm not doing it, I'm doing it for the love of the music. Then we come to the chorus where he's like, well, that's not true, I'm still here, I've been running all these decisions, even though you tell yourself it's for another reason, I never lost control.
Ah, so convincing someone to do something and kind of manipulating motivations in that way.
It's like the presence of something that you wish was not there, but is
But
no
it
matter how much
is
you deny it, is ultimately there.
the in this case or
Yeah.
in this example, sort of the desire for fame, um, still existing despite saying like it's for the music, man.
Yeah, and still driving you. It never lost control. It was still just a motivating factor. So yeah, again, like this, like even the chorus can be taken so many ways, whether it's autobiographical, whether it's about music itself and how he is just a performer, then he's sort of selling him the world in some way, whether it's selling them on a lie or giving up his connection to the world to be a performer instead. There's yeah, a lot of ways you can take this.
Yep. It's vague like that.
hmm Nonetheless, verse 2 seems to be about the narrator coming to realize that the man who sold the world is right. He's realizing that the reality presented by this individual is the actual truth and not what he had told himself. He says, "I laughed and shook his hand and made my way back home. I searched for form and land. For years and years I roamed. I gazed a gazeless stare at all the millions here. We must have died alone a long, long time ago."
Yeah, it's kind of the conversation ends, and it really paints this picture of him just like thinking about it a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, and then also says makes his way back home, but like he just keeps walking. There is no home to return to,
Yeah.
or he can't find it, or something.
There's no home. There's not even land or anything resembling
Right.
shapes, apparently. Because he searches for form and land. And so if the man has quite literally sold the world, it's gone. Earth is gone.
There's no Earth because he's so. I wonder if that's a pun in that way.
I feel like it is. I feel like he's playing around with the idea of what it means to sell the world. And this is the man taking this journey back home. He's like, well, I'll just go back to my regular life. And then on this journey, what should be like a quick 5-minute walk, is he's searching for form and land for years. He's going, oh, holy shit. Like,
The
something's
world's
not
gone.
right here. Yeah.
Someone
the
sold
whole world is
everything.
missing. Except for millions of presumably people are lost souls.
Yeah, perhaps in the same or seemingly in the same situation as him.
Mm-hmm.
Um, who are unable to perhaps reconcile something about their former self,
Mm-hmm.
unable to accept something they did in the past or something like that.
Perhaps, or, and this is where an idea I mentioned a little earlier comes up. So, like David Bowie said, this is about trying to like find a part of yourself when you're young. That's kind of self-fulfillment, becoming who you're meant to be.
Right.
What if the narrator and all of these millions here are the selves who were meant to be, but were never fulfilled?
So like it's kind of like an alternate reality. Things that could have happened, that could have been followed but weren't.
Yeah, and so he's been living in this false dream existence where that whatever destiny he had came to be. He became this part of himself he was searching for, but then he encounters the man on the stair who is his actual self, who fucked up, who sold the world, didn't pursue, didn't risk, didn't do whatever he needed to do to self-actualize, and now the fictionalized version of himself is left to wander in nothingness.
Because it doesn't exist.
Yeah, along with so many other
So many
people who have
millions
not
away.
self-actualized.
And he says, we must have died a long, long time ago.
Yeah. That's my best interpretation of this.
I like it. It sounds cool. And
But again, whether there's enough to merit it,
tough to say. So I mean, then right after we go back into the chorus. Well, first of all, now he's saying we must have died instead of I thought you died. And now he's saying we never lost control.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps
Now,
now
does that
from the
refer-
perspective of all those other selves.
That's my understanding of it. A lot of people assume it's him linking himself with the man on the stairs, the man who sold the world.
I mean, in a
And
sense, they are one and the same. Because really,
Mhm.
it's the same person.
Yeah.
So to say we never lost control, realistically, they always had the same motivations because they were the same person. So
That's right.
it's possible that it is then just denying its entire concept of the split self, which is kind of I mean, I've thought of that too myself, this idea of like, oh, I'm not that person anymore, but really you're still the same person. Like, just because you
Mm-hmm.
have a different idea about something doesn't mean you didn't think something in the past or you didn't do something in the past. It's very easy to separate yourself from your past self. So it's possible that it's just acknowledging that as well.
Yeah, exactly. It does seem to deal in a different light, and we talked about this quote on Life on Mars, where he said he's always sort of writing about the topic of isolation and alienation.
Right.
And so this is almost an alienation from the self. And again, just like in Life on Mars, how the film writer and the girl are united in that alienation, even though they don't know it. Here he's united with these millions in this sort of alienation and isolation from who they are.
Yeah, this weird like what's it? Um is it what's the like Greek area for just souls to wander around? Is that Elysium or is that
Yeah, Elysium, where there's the river that you can drink to forget about shit.
yeah, kind of has that vibe going on because they're just sort of like wandering souls.
Right, very lost. And while there's not like immense pain in this, there is this feeling of emptiness.
Yeah, it's like a bit sorrowful of like could
Mm-hmm.
have been different, but it wasn't. This is just how it turned out.
Yeah. So yeah, you're right. In the chorus, he goes, "Who knows? Not me. We never lost control." Perhaps referring to both him and the man who sold the world, who are one, and also to these millions here. You're face to face with the man who sold the world. So I think because I think this is now from the narrator instead of from the man on the stairs. He has embodied the role of the man who sold the world.
Oh, gotta move my mouse. Yeah, and I mean that's the song. That's the lyrics.
That is the song.
They have
For
that
one
sort
thing,
of like poetic vagueness to them. That's always
yeah.
so much fun to talk about.
One thing I didn't know until this week was both the line "form." I searched for "form and land." I always thought he said "foreign lands,"
It does sound
which,
like that. I always thought that too.
and I thought he gazed a Gazely stare.
Which doesn't mean anything as far as I can
Yeah,
tell.
and I looked up. So in order to understand what gazeless stare meant, I looked up what a gaze is. On Google, I just looked up the dictionary definition, and basically it's a gaze. It's a look with interest, right? It has some life to it. So a gazeless
Oh,
stare
I
is
see.
lifeless, which sort of plays into his idea of him being dead or having died a long time ago.
Yeah, my sort of natural interpretation of it was just that he was kind of staring off into the distance, kind of a
Yeah, it's almost
dead-eyed stare.
that's basically it, right? It's sort of disinterested. It is without focus.
You're looking
It's
ahead, but you're not really seeing anything. It's kind of like when you draw the distinctions, like you're listening, but you're not hearing anything I say. Like it's that kind of thing, but visually.
yeah. That's exactly right. So yeah, just worth pointing out. But yeah, that's the song. I think we did actually a pretty good job of not being like this is most certainly about this, while still being able to decompress
Yeah,
things.
I guess asterisk. It's like we said, pretty vague, so there's a lot of possible interpretations of things. These are
Mm-hmm.
the ones that seem most convincing to us,
Yeah.
or these are our reactions to them. But
And we
it's
would love to hear
yeah,
your interpretations of it. Hit us up on Twitter, #CoverMePod, @JakeTheCressy, @SomeAlexWiseGuy. Tell us what you think about these lyrics. Tell us whether you like this version, the Lulu version, or the Nirvana version best. Or another
yeah,
version we talk about on this episode. Now, with that,
yeah.
Alex, we're going to talk about the instrumentation on this. Which, one thing I want to note, there is a Moog synthesizer on this, which was allegedly borrowed from George Harrison of the Beatles.
George Harrison seems like he was kind of a cool guy back in the
Yeah,
70s.
yeah, back in the all the time Eddies, if you ask me.
Yeah, I guess so. It's just he was. That's the one you hear the stories from.
Yeah, that's fair, and that's when they matter, right? Because he was a big deal. So I was like, oh wow, he's so down to earth. But yeah, so apparently they got this Moog synthesizer from George Harrison.
So which part does
We
the
got
synthesizer play?
I don't know.
I didn't notice a synthesizer on this song,
Well, Alex,
but
I
I
will
wasn't
let you know.
listening for one.
Oh yeah, sometimes that can happen. I know there is a personnel list on this. So you got Tony Visconti on bass in this. You got Mick Ronson On guitar, you got Mick Woodmansey, aka Woody Woodmansey, on the drums and percussion, which features I have it written down what it is. It's a weird one. It's like a Yui or something like
Is
that.
it
It's
a
that, like,
Guiro?
yeah, Guiro. That's what
Yeah.
it is.
That's the like raking sound.
Yeah. So there is a Moog synthesizer in this somewhere. It's played by a man named Ralph Mace.
Maybe it's more audible in the 2020 remix version.
Maybe. I'm gonna hit that one right now. See what happens. So this opens up with the.
I mean, there are like organ sounds that I assumed were an organ, but maybe synthesizer.
Well, yeah, there's no organ listed, so I'd have to assume it's
The
the synth. Right,
just-
that's the part that comes in with the vocalizations.
So I
Yeah,
guess that
alright.
that must be it.
Mystery
right?
solved.
Wow, we're so good at this.
What are we, professionals? No, we're hobbyists.
No,
So
amateurs.
this opens with the electric guitar. There's an electric and an acoustic on this. The acoustic is rhythm by David Bowie. The electric is Mick Ronson.
Yeah,
And
that
it
makes
has
sense.
what's been described as a circular guitar riff.
Yeah, it's very
just kinda
repetitive. That's what
loops.
it opens with.
Yeah.
And it just repeats.
Yeah.
Not for the whole
Mhm.
song, but for a lot of the song. And it's pretty distinctive. It has an interesting sound to it. I've heard there are Latin elements on this album. I don't know exactly what scale that would imply. But anyway, it sounds cool, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, there is some elements of this of not straight Western or European music, whether it's Latin or otherwise.
Yeah, maybe it's just that guiro that they're referring to, which I think is
Maybe.
considered a Latin instrument.
Yeah, I think you're right. With a name like Guiro, it's got to be.
Anyway, it's a very distinctive like electric guitar riff, and it's fairly short and repetitive, but it kind of has a really cool sound to it, and I think it, despite the repetitiveness, like doesn't really wear out its welcome. I guess it also doesn't play for the whole thing, so it doesn't stick around too long.
Yeah, it comes in at the start and then a couple other points and kind of sets up maybe the circular nature of this song where the narrator is trapped in some strange space. It's eerie. It sets everything up. So we get that guitar in, we get a bass that starts to jump in near the end of that
Boom,
intro,
Boom, 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 boom.
and then we clear the way for bass, the percussion, David Bowie vocals, which have been put through a flange effect or flange effect. I don't know the correct pronunciation.
I mean, I usually
But
say
it's-
flange, but I won't claim to know what the actual pronunciation is.
Yeah. Yeah, and you get that guiro, which is critical. It plays
Wait.
a big role in that.
No, wait. Flanger?
What?
That's a thing,
Flanger.
right? Is it flanger?
That is
I've always
maybe
said
it's flanger.
flanger. Huh. Because, like, a flange is also just, like, a rubber thing.
Right.
So, I
Well-
don't know, man.
I don't know what to tell you.
All right.
So yeah, you get the verse section after the intro, which has these big spooky organ sustains done by the synth.
which must be that synthesizer. And back then, I like the early days of that like electronic music because they were like, we have this huge synthesizer. It might not have been huge, but and it can only play one note at a time. So we want to do this traditional music. So we'll record like 8 tracks, and that's how we make chords out of a synthesizer. So I don't know if they did
is
that
a
here.
lot of work.
But that is just a story about general synthesizer recording back in like the early
Right.
days. Where are we? We're on the verse.
Yeah, we're right in the verse.
Yeah.
So you got a real groove on this bass.
Mm-hmm. And that guiro.
That guiro is in strong. It is not a hidden element.
Yeah, and that guitar riff is gone. It's
Yeah.
all just acoustic.
Yeah, so real stripped down, real haunting. At about the 30-second mark, we get a double tracking of David Bowie on the line, which came as some surprise.
Yeah, that happens. I mean, David Bowie does that kind of stuff fairly often, where he'll have the like kind of disinterested lower version of himself just kind of in the background as a
Yeah, the one who's almost
backup
just
vocal.
talking.
Yeah, exactly. And just double those up. Which, I mean, I think it's a cool effect, but I'm a big David Bowie fan, so.
So yeah.
But he does
Sold
use it
on
quite a bit.
Yeah. And then we get kind of a big we get the guitar reintroduced on the "I Thought You Died Alone" line, but it's just playing the vocal melody.
Yes.
And then everything builds up for the chorus.
For the chorus, which I think is an interesting chorus musically, because to me it doesn't sound like a chorus; it sounds like a pre-chorus, and then there's no chorus.
Such build up.
That's what it feels like anyway. Yeah, because it's all it's like that ascending pattern, which starts on the bass, and then the electric guitar joins in. But yeah, it's a strange way of handling that, because the song really does feel like it doesn't get to the chorus, but it's heading there.
Yeah.
Kind of plays with that, which is an interesting sound. I guess you play with anticipation. But
yeah, it's this build up to just a breakdown.
Yeah, because at the end, it goes right back into that like opening section with the riff.
Except this time you got a little more drum action there, but beyond that, like, it is the same.
And then it just kind of like loops, because it does the same like bass lead into the verse, and then just another verse. And that's, as far as I can tell, the same as the first one.
Yeah, it's. I mean, this is still early Bowie. This is a very like hard rock, like simple progression here. Although this one isn't like the hardest rock, but it's got some elements of that.
No, yeah, it's not the Superman, but like
no,
it like the guitar has a like fairly distorted sound. It's not like it's all, it's not like it's just a electric guitar or like an acoustic strumming or something. It's all kind of together,
Yeah.
but it also has those interesting rhythm elements.
Yeah.
Particular like instruments, but also like the feeling kind of has a little bit more of a, I don't even know what you would call it.
Yeah, I don't know, but it's very it's more than the sum of its parts, right? Even though this all is simply composed, like it provides an energy.
It does
beyond
feel
that.
very simple and like fairly simple loop. Now in that second kind of half-ish of the song, or last like minute and a bit, there's kind of a, I guess you call it an outro. That riff is back, the intro riff. This is after we've gone through another verse and another chorus. Actually, two choruses, I believe.
Yeah, because it does a short instrumental break after the second chorus, jumps into a third chorus, and then we get another short instrumental break, which leads into sort of our outro section where we get these far off Bowies.
Yeah, doing a lot of and kind of like multiple Bowies harmonizing again, fading in and out and sweeping around. That riff is still going. The low vocals kind of have this like speaking into a fan effect.
Oh,
like
yeah.
It almost
you can hear
sounds
around like 320.
Yeah. It almost sounds like they're just kind of buzzy.
Yeah.
Like those, what are they called? The like jawbone instruments. Kind of sounds like that, but vocal.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
so
then
we
that's
sort of fade
it
out.
for a while, and then it fades out. Yeah, pretty slowly. Long fade out. I think it kind of works based on the content of the song. Like, we sometimes don't like fade outs on principle, but I think I'm finding more and more that we just maybe don't like bad fade outs or arbitrary fade outs.
That seems to be the case, because this one seems to let you sit in the, because it delivers the story in about 2 minutes. And then after that, you're sort of just left to sit in the idea of what happened in this song.
Which is kind of what happens in verse 2. He talks to this guy, the guy says something, and he's like, oh shit, he's right. And just like thinks about it for years and years, supposedly.
Yeah, and then it's just
And the song kind of just
this-
gives you space to be like, hey, did that blow your mind?
exactly, as there's almost this like hollow like wailing, this lamenting of the truth.
And you're like, I
That
get
was
it, because like the music is telling the story, but I don't know what the lyrics mean. Come on, man.
yeah, exactly. It's it's like looking up a Snopes like. Is it Snopes who does? No, it's somebody else who does it. But like looking up as a plot synopsis, be like, well, yeah, I get the general idea, but I don't. The details don't make sense to me.
Right. I mean, I usually go to IMDb for my plot synopses.
Right, I was thinking more for books. As
For
an
books,
English
like
major
Cliff
who
Notes?
definitely read. Yeah, Cliff Notes. That's
Cliff
the one.
Notes. That's the only one I can think.
Yeah,
Cole's
that's fair, and
Notes.
that's
Cole's Notes is one.
there you go. Yeah,
It's
and
just
that's,
like
and that's
people's notes.
people's notes. But
It's like you're reading someone's notes. Sorry, I keep interrupting.
Come on, Alex. I'm trying to wrap us up and bring us to the next one here.
Yeah.
We're already almost an hour in. We gotta pick up the pace here.
We gotta talk about Lulu.
We passed upon the stair. We spoke of was and when, although I wasn't there.
Lulu in 1974, recorded in 1973. Lulu we've talked about before. Didn't she also do the first version of "Here Comes the Night" by them?
Was that Lulu?
I feel like it was. I could be wrong. I've been wrong before.
Wow.
I'll tell you the truth.
Here
I'll
it
be wrong again.
comes.
Here comes the night.
Here
yeah, I feel
comes
like it was
the
her.
night.
Well, now I gotta look it up because I'm
Yeah, Lulu is on here.
definitely on the list.
Yeah. The list is not in order, I don't think.
No,
But that's, yeah.
I didn't do that back then.
So
Yeah.
Lulu was a more successful artist at the time. Supposedly David Bowie met up with her and was like, we're going to make a pretty sweet album. And like they did this song at least.
The quote, according to Lulu, was that he said, "I want to make a motherfucker of a record with you because you're a great singer."
And they made this song.
Yeah. So this is David Bowie on the saxophone, on guitar as well. It says, I think the rhythm guitar and backing vocals. You have Mick Ronson on guitar, Trevor Bolder, who was the bassist for the Spiders from Mars, on bass,
Right.
Mike Garson on piano, and a dude named Ainsley Dunbar on drums, who's done drums for Bowie, Frank Zappa, some other fucking names I forgot. But like a big like session drummer essentially.
Right. Studio guy. She also did a Bond song. Just want to throw that out there. She did the Man with the Golden
Yeah, the
Gun.
man with the golden gun, right?
Yeah, so this is actually quite a different feel to this version. It opens with this saxophone riff, which I guess is David Bowie on the saxophone.
Mhm.
So like there's similar feelings, I think, in this version, but it approaches it in a very different way. Like it's much higher energy.
Yeah.
The saxophone creates a very different feel, like it's much harsher feel, kind of cuts
Yeah, it's
through.
Loud and chaotic.
Yeah. Several saxophones actually. I multiple tracks, I assume, but like there's really
I would
low
assume,
like
yeah.
drone there, as well as this bam 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 like riff on the saxophone.
Right, yeah, and then there's the low. So you're right. It has to be multi-tracked.
Mm-hmm. And then I'm trying to remember if I thought anything specific about her singing.
It's been described as sleazy by critics of the time. I don't know if I necessarily agree with
What
that.
does it mean for it to be sleazy?
I don't know. For me, I portray this one with a sort of more theatric approach to it.
Okay.
It's a little more theater. It's a little more like if you watched her Top of the Pops performance, she's wearing this like black gangster outfit, so it's all like
What?
a suit and tie with a big hat.
Oh. Okay.
So yeah, and it is a little more show tuney. I think it's also Greta described it as sounding like disco Gwen Stefani. That's I think her exact phrasing.
I wish I knew more
So I
about disco or Gwen Stefani.
Well, Gwen Stefani, no doubt, a little.
Yeah. It does have that like backbeat rhythm.
Yeah, that dun dun on the guitar rhythm.
In particular, I mean, even the way the drums are played, they're
Yeah.
got a pretty strong accent on the backbeat there, like stress on the
And
backbeat.
there are hand drums and a kit drum on this, I'm pretty sure.
Definitely lots of drums.
Mm-hmm.
And like a little bit of piano. Not very much.
Yeah, not
but
much.
like between like leading into the verse, they'll do like a piano like gliss.
Yeah. I think there's one at 143 if you're looking for an
Yeah,
example.
and like I can't hear it at other times, or I didn't notice it. What else does she do? She does like a doubling up of the vocals in the chorus.
Right.
So like there's a male vocalist.
David Bowie.
Is it David Bowie?
It's David Bowie, yeah.
I couldn't decide if it was David Bowie.
Well,
before.
It's according to the Wikipedia
but
article, it's David Bowie.
if he sang backups,
and you're hearing him like do his like what we said is disinterested lower range.
yeah,
But I think it's much cleaner on the track than you usually get it on like regular David Bowie songs.
yeah, he's not singing like David Bowie so much, and he seems to be doing his sort of like lower range before he really developed it. So it's kind of a different sound that you don't get out of Bowie, or maybe it's just covered up by enough other stuff that I don't notice. But it doesn't sound a lot like Bowie to me.
Yeah. It's very interesting because this entirely doesn't sound too much like Bowie to me, despite the fact that it's mostly David Bowie and David Bowie musicians on this track.
The saxophone feels Bowie. Not super duper Bowie, but it feels Bowie. But yes, the rest of it's a lot more like upbeat and lighthearted, particularly compared to, and like dancey. Particularly compared to The Man Who Sold the World, but even like his adjacent albums didn't have anything like this.
No, yeah, you wouldn't hear sax work like this for, like, I want to say at least a few years, like until Diamond Dogs, maybe, like
where you get that really like screamy sax.
Yeah, actually, Aladdin Sane I think has some of that where he gets a little rougher with instruments in general.
Yeah, and like there's some saxophone. And Hunky Dory doesn't have this kind of sax. Anyway.
No, it does have some sax. But yeah, it's very it's almost like Bowie before Bowie in some ways where he's doing
like it was all there, but he was kind of holding himself back and like not putting everything on every album, maybe. Which I can respect that.
Yeah. So this one, I think it's a great showing. I think Lulu sings well enough. I think that the saxophone itself as this chaotic like element in terms of the sort of mental struggle that The Man Who Sold the World seems to talk about in some loose sense adds a good element.
Right.
But like overall, I think the original version haunts me more, which is kind of what I come to this song for.
Yeah, this one definitely doesn't last in the same way.
This one's almost like a haunted house.
Yeah, and it kind of
it
even has like features. Like it has like it brings in the ascending riff later on for the second chorus. Just for a bit.
Yeah.
Like for a riff. And then it kind of moves on to the next thing. And then there's even like later on in the song another riff that doesn't sound like it fits to me. This is like after like in the outro, this is like 240 or so. There's just like a guitar playing like it doesn't sound the same as the rest of the song to me.
Right, it's like very
sounds a little out of place.
Yeah, it's a little out of place.
So yeah, like I said, it kind of sounds like features in your haunted house.
It's you can see the spooky lights going where there's spotlights with like patterns on them moving around as people in big like costumes, which are just like suits that are kind of ragged, jump around. It's got that kind of vibe to it, which isn't necessarily bad. This was more popular than David Bowie's version. Hit number 3 on the UK charts, number 8 on the Irish charts.
Yeah, it's kind of funner. It definitely feels like it would appeal more widely. Like I wouldn't play The Man Who Sold the World at like most parties. Right? But the saxophone does give it kind of an edge, I think, saxophone in
Yeah.
particular. Like it does make it very crunchy, whereas the original doesn't feel crunchy in that way.
That's yeah,
I know,
100%.
crunchy. Does that mean anything? Probably not, but it means something to
It
me.
absolutely does, but yeah, it adds something. I 100% agree that the saxophone is a huge plus.
Yeah, definitely a huge
In
part of what makes this version sort of its own thing. And it's also
Mhm.
David Bowie doing that. So
Yeah, well, so yeah, who can complain about it?
there's also a vibraphone in this version, or
Yeah.
something like that. I always worry that I'm saying the wrong thing. So it's like a vibraphone or a. I think it's too low to be a glockenspiel.
Some sort of thing you hit with a hammer and it makes a little ding, 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 ding.
Yeah, I looked up tubular bells. It's not tubular bells. They ring too
That's my
much.
favorite Christmas song.
Tubular bells.
Tubular bells.
Tubular bells.
Yeah, you mentioned playing this at a party. I'm gonna go ahead and say it. Lulu's The Man Who Sold the World. Throw it on your Halloween playlists.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Oh yeah. And how does this one end? Does it just fade out too? Yeah, it does.
I think so. Yeah.
Totally fine. Totally
It kind of has
acceptable.
its own outro and then does some saxophone. All right. You ready to talk about a bunch more versions?
Hell yeah, Alex. Let's talk about John Cougar
Let's talk
Mellencamp in
about
1976.
Cougar Mellencamp.
We passed up on the stairs. We spoke of was and where. Although I wasn't there.
Do you know what he was at this time?
I
was surprised to see this
believe
too.
John Cougar. Because
Okay.
I didn't check.
That's
could
fair. I don't
probably-
know his history. This is essentially before he was really big.
Let's
Apparently,
see.
the 80s
76
was
to
when he.
82 before me was Johnny Cougar and John Cougar. He was one of
there you
those two.
go.
Probably. I mean, this is 76, so probably Johnny Cougar. That's what he was first.
Johnny Cougar, baby. Yeah, doing The Man Who Sold the World as
Yeah,
a bonus track.
Which I was surprised by. But then I thought about it more, and realistically, my own preconceptions of like what it is to be art rock versus blue collar rock are mostly just created by like marketing and are generally arbitrary. So there's no reason there can't be cross pollination between the two.
Yeah, and if anything was going to reach John Cougar Mellencamp from David Bowie's collection, like The Man Who Sold the World is a pretty safe bet.
And like that all said, this is a cover of the Lulu version.
Exactly. Yeah, so it has that. It's got that very driving rhythm behind it. It's a very fast-moving version. This is the shortest version we're going to talk about 2.5 minutes. We get that bam bam from the rhythm guitar almost immediately, along with an electric guitar doing the saxophone part.
Yep, that's all moved on to the electric guitar,
Mm-hmm.
as it is said.
This is the Heartland, baby.
This is the Heartland. Although, that said, it does bring something in. Now, the original has a guiro. This has a clave. This is now the second verse adds a
Okay.
clave. So that's another like South American instrument, or
Interesting.
it's used a lot in South American music, I should say, because
Yeah.
I don't necessarily know where it came from.
So this one does have a faster pace to it, which really makes the bass sound much more disco.
Disco, eh?
Yeah, it's got this
definitely
like
feels
this
different.
bounce to it, and I think it's doing octaves at least at some point. So boom, bam, boom, bam, boom, bam, boom, bam. It's very dancey at the very least, which is again strange for John Mellencamp.
Yeah, it is. I guess it's also early enough. I'm not knowing the like history of John Mellencamp that well. I'm assuming he didn't have like his persona totally established at the time.
Yeah, this does seem to be more like straight up rock. Like even vocally, he's not putting on as much of that like heartland affectation.
Right.
He also mirrors that that vibraphone part from Lulu at almost the exact same time, around
That's true.
135.
That's true. It's on the "We Must Have Died a Long, Long Time Ago" line.
Mm-hmm.
It also has Oh, does it add a guitar riff? I'm trying to remember if that's from the Lulu version.
Around 155, it adds that riff, right? I don't know.
Well, that's not what I was referring to specifically, but it does
Okay.
have that, and that is different. But
Yeah.
similar to the Lulu version, also feels a little out of place.
Mm-hmm.
But because the cover of the Lulu version, I don't know.
Yeah, it's very clearly inspired by that. There's no other way you're getting that guitar
For
track
sure.
at the start.
For sure. And it cuts out some of the repetition, so it's over real quick.
Yeah, it's very efficient, and it is a bonus track, so maybe not as much time put in just in general.
It feels a little half-baked, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Incomplete.
Yeah,
even though
but
it follows the Lulu version pretty closely, but
pretty closely.
Then just kind of ends.
Yeah, it almost strips it down. It's almost like, because whereas the original version of the song is just your standard rock formation plus a Moog synthesizer and that percussion, the Guiro. And so then we move into the big arrangement with Lulu with saxophone and just quite loud instrumentation. And this one strips it down a bit but keeps the musical phrases.
Yeah.
So it's sort of an interesting progression. But yeah, ultimately this one is mostly, I think, on here and fulfills the role of being a novelty because it's John Cougar Mellencamp doing David Bowie.
My jaw dropped when I saw there was a John
Yeah,
Mellencamp
I was blown
version.
away.
Turns out it's not that interesting. It's more interesting that it happened and not that interesting to listen to.
Of an interpretation. Yeah, if it sounded like Little Pink Houses, except it was the man who sold the world, I'd be blown away.
If this was John Mellencamp in the 90s covering this song, that would be probably a little different, I'm assuming.
Yeah, but this is young and upcoming Johnny Cougar. He's adding on an extra track, I think, because he liked it and could play it, and it was like, oh, this is pretty fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pretty much a footnote in this.
It's an interesting thing. It's an oddity. Check it out. It doesn't take that long to listen to. So.
And we're gonna move from a footnote to what I think is just one of the juggernaut ones we're gonna talk about here today. Midge, you're in 1982.
We spoke of was and when, although I wasn't there.
I didn't know this was in 1982. I also didn't know it wasn't a remix. I thought it was a remix. It's actually just a full-on cover.
Yes.
Featured in the 2015 Hideo Kojima video game Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain, where it features prominently in the intro. James Midge is a Scottish musician, singer, songwriter, and producer. His stage name is derived from the name Jim, but said backwards. Midge.
Jim Midge. Yeah, that's a fun stage name. It doesn't work with my name very well. It's too obvious.
Alex. Wouldn't that just be like Exhale?
Sailor.
Yeah, it's a bit weirder.
It's a mouthful. Anyway, yes, this is in Metal Gear Solid 5. I remember also thinking this is odd and might just be a remix of the original. Mostly because I think the context it's played in the game masks it a little bit because there's stuff happening at the same time, so it's hard to listen to just the track. But now that I listen to it, it seems much more obvious that it is a completely different song.
Yeah.
In particular because it opens with a different riff.
Well, that riff is the sax riff, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess it is. It feels more like the original version, but it still uses the riff from the Lulu version.
It's got almost an Arabian vibe on that riff, I find. Maybe it's just because I'm associating it with the game, which takes place in a desert in Afghanistan, right?
True. Although this song plays on Cyprus. That's not that significant, though.
That's right. Fair enough. But nonetheless, yeah, so it starts out with that track. It's a lot of electronic instruments on this.
Yes, we're in the mid-'80s. A lot of synthesizer going on.
A lot of synthesizer
that opening riff is kind of fluty type synthesizer.
Yeah, we will get a lot of fluty stuff. And his vocals are actually mixed pretty low in the track compared to everything else.
Which is
That's
another
another
reason
reason I
it
think
was
it's
kind of difficult to tell if it was a remix.
yeah. So there's a big emphasis on the atmosphere here, which I think is like one of the winning features of the original is the atmosphere it produces.
Mm-hmm.
And two, I think he does a great job of using electronic instruments to do that, and also incorporating the Lulu riffs, which are great. Like that sax riff is awesome, and then bringing that back to its original haunting roots.
Yeah, because this doesn't feel like the Lulu version at all.
No,
Um, it also, what does this one do? It does like a cutout, so the whole first verse is just like these metallic synth sweeps, and then brings in some like drums and doubles on the "I thought you died alone."
yeah,
It's like a whispered
we'll-
line. So yeah,
yeah,
that's
we'll
kind of
get
the
that
sort of
doubling.
stuff that brings in that haunting atmosphere.
And then yeah, as we build up to the chorus, we get the big drum machine hits. And then we get a little space, then we get that same pattern from the original, but on some more like crunchy synth instruments. Dope, 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 dope. Or something
Yeah,
else.
for that build. There's also a piano in this one that plays like a bit.
Yes.
But like most of the time when it plays, it's like hit really hard. It's really like a strong strike of the notes when it plays.
Yeah. And usually it's like a singular note.
Yep. Definitely.
Yeah, after the first chorus, we come into a much more textured, like a lot more layers coming on in the second verse after the first chorus. It's
Yeah, because like everything stays on, but then like the bass, there's like a different bass line, and then that harsher synth you were mentioning, that piano comes in at some point. It's definitely a more like complex arrangement of it.
Yeah.
But definitely feels like it's in the same vein.
And like this version's just about 6 minutes long.
Yeah.
So we get in the middle we get a very like big instrumental space.
Yeah. Well, actually, the other thing they do before that is they bring back the intro riff from the original.
That's right. Yeah.
And that is, I mean, I dig it.
Yeah, because this version draws on the two biggest versions that came before it so clearly and like so expertly, I feel like it really finds a good balance between those and brings us something that feels fresh, but also so reminiscent of those two.
Yes, it's a good combination of the two.
And it leans on what the original had in that sort of back minute of just instrumental haunting, but it plugs that in right in the center of this piece. It's like, here we go, we're gonna sit in it
for a very long time. Because it was the 80s. You could do that.
Yeah, you 100% could.
And they did.
And they did. Relies heavily on that circular guitar riff, but on a sort of fluty synth. Like you said, very simple, but for some reason you can just fucking loop that thing and it sounds great.
Yeah, I don't know if I've just heard it so much and I like it, so I can hear it even more.
Right? Yeah, we're like, wow, it's a classic. Yeah,
is it just
maybe it
fundamentally
is just
catchy?
good.
I don't know. Maybe no one can answer that question.
Maybe not. You get some of those vocalizations in this middle section. They start to build in more as you come along. Around 3:40, you get the piano joining in again to do that. Yeah, and it's basically the instrumentals until the 5:43 mark.
It adds some like vocalizations as well.
Yeah, those tend to build throughout.
But they're also like fairly backgrounded.
Yeah.
But it all kind of fits in. It's that like kind of textury synth thing that was present but in the 80s but like developed a lot afterwards.
Yeah.
And then cuts down for the fade out. Like the fade is pretty long because the song's pretty long. And then sort of the instruments drop out over time. And then at the end it's that piano and the fluty synth, and then that's it.
Yeah. Now, at the time I first heard this when playing Metal Gear Solid, I think I was skeptical of it, partially because of the history I knew of the man who sold the world and how people thought it was a Nirvana song, and I was like, people should know it's David Bowie. Ah! I was mad about it, but coming back to it this week, I've been pretty impressed by this version. I think it's very good.
It
Those are my thoughts.
definitely has like a distinct space among these covers
Mhm.
we're talking about.
Yeah. Anything else to say, Alex?
No, I think it's time to talk about the last big one we're going to talk about today. Not the last one we're going to talk
Yeah.
about today, but there were four covers I had to put on this.
Yeah.
Three because they were important, and one because it was John Mellencamp, and I was like, what? But this is now
Yeah.
the last one of those.
Yeah, and that is Nirvana, released in 1994, recorded in 1993 at their MTV Unplugged appearance.
We passed upon the stair, spoken wasn't well, although I wasn't there.
Y'all know Nirvana.
Yeah, I wasn't sure. I was second guessing myself. There's two versions of this by Nirvana.
Is there two versions?
This is the unplugged version, and then they have another live version that they play that's not unplugged. I mean, this isn't really
Okay.
unplugged, but like they all have acoustic instruments that are plugged
Yeah.
in and amplified, but like they played it live. So they have like another version that I put this one on, but I wasn't sure. They're
Well, yeah, because I
they're
think
similar.
this is, yeah, and this is the version.
Okay.
Like, this is why
Right. I guess this
everybody
is
knows this.
All right. I wasn't sure, but
Yeah, this version was number 3 for a time on MTV's most played music videos. It hit number 7 on Canada's Much Music Countdown one time. Very popular. And that said, it's very, very faithful to the original.
it
There's
is
a little
very
bit of
close. Also,
Mhm.
brief
Also,
tangent.
yes.
Unplugged. These are all amplified instruments.
Every single instrument is plugged
Except
in.
I think there's a cello that
Yeah!
plays. That I
There
didn't
is a
know
cello.
until I watched the video.
Yeah, and then you could like pick out a sound that matched the movement, right? Because that's what
Yes,
I did.
exactly,
I was like, oh yeah, it's
exactly.
there, like a bit.
But yeah, it like kind of follows the bass.
Mm-hmm.
And like his
Important
voice
things
as
to
well
note.
in the vocal section.
Apparently, in a journal Kurt Cobain kept, he listed "The Man Who Sold the World" at number 45 in his top 50 favorite albums. Him and the bassist Chris Novoselic were introduced to this album by one of their drummers, Chad Channing, who bought a used LP version of it and then recorded it on a cassette and like played it in the car for them. And Cobain was like, "Oh, it's fucking awesome."
Classic. Yeah, this seems like it would appeal to the like Nirvana era of music. Obviously, David Bowie was pretty influential to music that came after him and like also was contemporary to him. But there's
Mhm.
sort of that like existential ennui present in this. There's like this downer note that I would associate with grunge generally.
Yeah.
And
And especially with like,
I like all that
Cobain.
stuff too.
Yeah, I think
But
it's great.
also that idea of like, I mean, there's sort of ideas of selling out and ideas of trying to find yourself and things like that that are like fairly universal, but also that I would generally associate with grunge.
Right. Yeah, they're more pronounced in the grunge era for sure. Yeah, and this version it's the most popular version of this, I think, at least in modern times. It's a very straightforward sounding version. I actually have a quote from Bowie here. He says, "I was simply blown away when I found that Kurt Cobain liked my work, and I've always wanted to talk to him about the reasons for covering The Man Who Sold the World." He continues, "It was a good, straightforward rendition and sounded somehow very honest. Would have been nice to work with him, but just talking with him would have been really cool." Yeah. So that's honestly a good just summary of it. This is a very straightforward rendition.
Yeah, it is. It is. I'm just trying. Is there like? I mean, it's really that like close cover, but distinct enough just because it's sort of in the style of a band that we know the style of.
That's right.
Like they do a
And
pretty solid cover of it, and it sounds like Nirvana playing it, you know.
yeah,
But beyond that, there's not a ton to set it apart.
for sure. It's and like it's a good demonstration of Nirvana's use of tone. Like the tone on the
Mm-hmm.
guitar is, I think, a great distortion quality. His musical delivery, his vocals on this are like exactly what the song asks for. So when people, of course, and this is coming back to my own experience with this song, I used to hate this version because it wasn't the David Bowie version, essentially.
Right.
But coming back to it now, it's really just like a matter of, it's a flip of the coin, really, whether this is better or worse than the David Bowie version. If you're a Nirvana fan, you really love Nirvana, this one's going to cut through, and I think rightfully so. It's essentially an update for a different era, a different genre, a different audience.
Yeah,
And
perhaps even a different continent.
Perhaps.
If that's even significant. I once read a thing that said it was, but I don't understand personally.
Well, this might come to an idea we talked about where David Bowie sort of took the performer angle on music. Like when he's up there, he's a performer, right?
Ah, right.
With Kurt Cobain, there seems to be the removal of that, as if this is Kurt Cobain simply singing to the people. So there's less of that barrier, which maybe resonated more with a modern era.
Yeah,
than
I guess
the
the fact that it's
semi-theatrics.
live. Sorry, I was talking over you. That was very rude.
No, go ahead.
I guess
No,
the
it's
fact
good.
that it's live as well sort of
Mhm.
adds to that.
Yeah.
Because it is, I mean, the band's there, but but the fact that it's kind of a low key version and the camera really focuses on Kurt Cobain,
Yeah.
a lot of the time kind of has that quality of like a more personal thing. Yeah.
And a lot of people have, since he died. I mean, he passed shortly after
Yeah.
the recording of this. It was the next year. People really do like connect the lyrics of this song to him, with the ideas of mental illness up in the air. Like you even mentioned, possible suicide connotations. Like
True.
there is this strong now spiritual connection between Kurt Cobain and this song, despite it being a David Bowie original. Worth noting a lyrical change he does. Instead of seeing all the millions there, he says, "We walked a million hills."
Oh, that's what he says?
Yes, I had to check Genius for that, but that is what
Okay.
he says.
Yeah, he mumbles it a little bit, but I guess
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say that David Bowie doesn't mumble anything in that song either, so.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
It also we were talking about the tone. It has an interesting sound. It's all very kind of buzzy.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's just part of it being live, but it's an interesting kind of tone to the whole thing, I think.
Yeah, and he does the vocalization part on the guitar. So that
Yes, and that cello
That's right.
joins in there with him too.
That's correct. Yeah. So and that's an acoustic guitar that he's actually also run through a fuzz box. So something to add distortion to the guitar when he needs it.
Yeah, which he plays the like intro riff on it, and then just kind of
Mhm.
strums the rest, so it's cleaner for the rest, and then he'll throw that fuzz on, I guess.
Yeah, and there is also another guitarist there. So there's two guitars holding this down.
Mm-hmm. And
And a
also,
cello.
young Dave Grohl in a ponytail and a turtleneck.
Yeah, unrecognizable almost.
Yeah.
Yeah, but this is it's a good performance. You hear him talk about the end. He asks if he fucked that one up, and then he's like, "Oh, I might not, fuck this next one up." Just
Mhm.
some stage banter with the people. He says something about doing the next song in a different key, and he's like, "And if it sounds bad, these people are just gonna have to wait." And it's it's very
Yeah,
charming.
just
and-
like that banter. And that's part of that, like you were saying, that sort of like direct feeling. I guess
Mhm.
face-to-face feeling. One other thing I think that adds to that, there's like a moment where it starts to, like, feedback starts to happen. And I'm assuming someone backstage had to hit a button or slide something to make that not
Right.
happen. Because it doesn't last very long, but like you can hear it start. So there's kind of that like imperfection, which is always nice to hear. Or always
Yeah.
interesting, you know.
Yeah, it's
Part
always
of the
interesting to
story of
see.
this version.
Yeah, how it still like it sometimes improves the overall result, even though it is technically a flaw.
Mhm.
Yeah. So that's the Nirvana version, a straightforward cover that somehow manages to stand toe to toe with the original despite basically doing the same things.
Yeah, just by distinctly covering it with your own sound.
Mhm. For that reason, I'm going to say it's pretty cool.
It was pretty solid.
Pretty solid. With that, we're going to talk about Eye to Eye in 2014.
We passed upon the stairs. We spoke of was and when, although I wasn't there.
Alex,
Yes.
is this the French prog rock group? Is that what this is?
Maybe.
Maybe, yeah.
Maybe. There's 2 or 3 possibly groups with this name. I think mixed in on Spotify.
Okay, so Spotify has erroneously listed them all together.
Yes, because there's an album from 2009, and then there's 3 albums with the same font for the band name. That's different from the
Right.
first one, and then there's this album, which I think is a completely different band.
I think you must be right because I saw a picture of them on the one with the one with the most recent album there. I found their Facebook page and they're all dudes.
Yes, and also if you listen to them, they don't sound anything alike.
I didn't do that, but that's also a smart move.
I know, right? It seems so obvious in retrospect.
Yeah.
And all the listeners, like if you go to About, people all listen from Brazil. So I don't know what's going on here.
Yeah, it is what it is. So this
And
is
also the most
2014.
listened thing is something they appear on allegedly, which is a forever freestyle thing. Like if you look at their most popular stuff.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
there's
yeah,
at
yeah.
least probably 3 different groups on this page. There's also another band called I2, not the number 2 I.
Right, yeah.
That's just a different American band. So like I don't know who these people are is what I'm saying.
Yeah, it is confusing, but they do this version that we're going to talk about, which is got some sort of your light orchestra focus. There's some violin and some cello in the mix here.
Yeah, it starts with the intro riff. Is that bass? Is that cello? Is
I
that something-
believe
it's
so.
plucking.
Yeah.
It's plucked. Bam, 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 but doesn't like ring like a guitar would.
Yeah. It's definitely in. I don't know if it's full on cello or if there's something slightly smaller than that, but it's definitely it's in that range.
The vocals are at least doubled, possibly just 2 women harmonizing.
I believe it's 2 women harmonizing.
That's what it sounds like.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, sometimes these audio mixers are tricky,
Yeah,
and they just layer stuff. Like I was saying with those early electronic albums, sometimes you had one single monophonic synthesizer, and you just like layer a whole whack of tracks on top of each other, and you make a whole big thing out of it.
That's right. So they'll put in the time. So you can't always just assume, oh, no, they're too busy to double track it. They'll
But
fucking
anyway,
8-track it.
it does sound like just 2 people singing and harmonizing.
Mm-hmm.
And this one's all like, or not all, but mostly like acoustic. It's definitely a more acoustic feeling on it. There is an electric guitar that comes in pretty early on, but it's muted early on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it comes in with the circular guitar riff a little later. It's distorted and it's still pretty low in the mix, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
so like we start on that bass, but then later on. Yeah, it gets played on the guitar.
We get like a musical break on I Thought You Died Alone where it's just the vocals and then they come back. There's hand drumming on this.
There is hand drumming on this. It's got that sound to it. The way they sing, to me, sounds a bit jazzy, but that's always like I'm not an expert, you know?
Right.
Just the way they kind of maybe it's classical. I don't know exactly what the word for it. The way they like shape their vowels sounds very
it's
trained.
very trained, very classical, very much I don't think what this song deserves in treatment.
Yeah, it's kind of it's a very like soft feeling and straightforward, and it doesn't have like the kind of intrigue of the other good versions, because this is really they all kind of have something like there's a sort of mystery of the Bowie version. The Nirvana has this more like hard edge to
Yeah.
it. And then obviously the Midge version also kind of has that mystery
Yeah,
thing
and
tied
even
in
the
with the
Lulu
like
version has a bit of
spaciness.
chaos to it.
Yeah, so they all kind of have these aspects to them, but this one is more like the John Mellencamp version and doesn't really have that much of an identity
Mm-hmm.
for the
With
kind of intrigue.
Yeah, I think with that, their bass is, I think, maybe one of the strongest elements. In the verses, it has a really good
Boom, boom,
groove,
boom, boom, boom.
and you
Oh
could
yeah.
almost get some of that like New Orleans jazz, kind of like some Bayou shit going on, and that would play with this.
Yes, I do agree that that's probably the strongest part of it because I didn't notice it before, but when I started listening to it today, kind of got into it, you know?
Mm-hmm. Where you're like, oh, this is
Oh,
this
yeah.
is something I can
That's a
like
good
nod
sound.
along to. I can get into this. There's a guitar solo in this around 212.
There is a guitar solo in this.
Yeah.
It starts with like the verse melody and then just goes into a solo. It I think it has an interesting sound to it actually. It's kind
Yeah,
of
I think
like
it's a good tone.
it's like a bit bouncy. I'm trying to figure out if this is twang. I don't know if this is twang. I don't know.
Wait,
It's like kind of low and echoey. Yeah. What do you think? How would you describe it?
Yeah, it's almost like kind of hearkening to older recordings, but focusing on a bassier, like a lower end rather than the high end.
Yeah, it's kind of like approaching jangle pop,
Mm-hmm.
but like cutting out a bunch of high end.
Yeah, it's like jangle pop, but all low end.
Yeah, so it's like the guitar part in James Bond theme, but more filtered.
Yeah, it definitely made me think of that a little bit. So yeah, like the guitar solo, interesting. The bass on this,
Yes.
groovy.
Honestly, the solo itself, fine, but I like the
Mhm.
sound of the guitar. Interesting.
Yeah.
So there's at least
Yeah, the
two
solo's
interesting things
passable.
about this song, but they don't really last. They don't really. I don't think it's like enough. But those are definitely
Mhm.
two things about this song.
Yeah, and like the vocals really don't do it for me. And if that's all you had for vocals, you could maybe try and just tuck them in the same way that Midge does, where it's like they're obviously not the focus.
Right,
they're
but
there.
this one is they're up front for sure.
Yeah, they're right in your face. So yeah, this one really didn't move the meter much for me, except for a couple of elements.
Mm-hmm.
With that, let's talk about Thin White Ziggy
Yeah.
in 2015.
We passed up on the stairs. We spoke of wars and when, although I wasn't there.
Thin White Ziggy, which as a name is like a painful Bowie reference. Just like
Yeah.
very like upfront. These are Bowie things. Although interestingly enough, this is a cover of the Lulu version. Well, probably it's a cover of the
Yeah.
Midge version,
But it's really not.
but it's really a cover of the Lulu version. I say that
Yeah.
only because this is an album, or the album it seems to be on, is music featured in the video game Metal Gear Solid 5, Diamond
Mhm.
Dogs Phantom Pain. And in the title says from Metal Gear Solid 5 Phantom Pain. So, yeah.
And that is the weird thing about this group, who only existed in 2016, basically.
Yes, I couldn't really
Um,
figure out who they were.
I
They
couldn't
seem
figure
to
out who they
exist
were.
for this.
Yeah, and for anything which is like a compilation. So a lot, if you look at their most popular songs, almost every version has a brackets after it, attributing the song to some popular piece of media. The Man Who Sold the World from Metal Gear Solid 5, Under Pressure from Rock Band 3, Starman from The Martian.
From Rock Band 3? Like, what?
Yeah, from Rock Band, not even from Shrek 2. No, I'm kidding.
That's not
Shrek
even
2
like
changes in it.
featured in a thing. That's like Rock Band just puts pop songs in it.
Yeah,
like
pop
there's so
songs
many
in there,
songs that
that's-
could be from Rock Band, but they're not.
Yeah, that's like
Anyway, that's hilarious.
circular referencing. Yeah,
Yeah.
but that's like what they do with all of these songs, and except for Heroes and Dancing in the Street, are the
Some of
only
them
ones
even
that do
have
not have a
multiple
brackets.
references.
Yeah.
Like Let's Dance from Zoolander, We Own the Night, and Boat That Rocked. Like Golden Years
And
from
that's
A
on one
Knight's
version.
Tale.
Another version attributes Let's Dance to Rock Band.
Yeah, I'm on their David Bowie soundtrack at the movies, a tribute to music featured in films.
Yeah. So
Anyway,
this is,
they're an odd group.
My best guess is there's some sort of like loose collection of musicians from other projects who are also unsuccessful, would be my guess, who came together in 2016 because they're like, David Bowie's dead, and now we're all fans of him. Let's churn out some garbage, and here is some of that garbage for us to listen to today.
Right. Yeah, that sounds about right.
So you got the sax on this. It sounds almost identical to the Lulu version. There's some buzzing instrument that hits those sort of driving two notes and just kind of drones in the bottom of the track.
Yeah, it plays that low sax sound. Later on, it plays a little bit more clearly, and it does seem to be a guitar.
Okay.
But it's not apparent at first.
Definitely not apparent at first.
Just playing like really low. For a guitar. Let's see what else. There's like a quick. There's an electric piano in this version. That plays a couple times. Like it plays a gliss, which happens in the Lulu version as well on the piano, I believe. And has later on plays this like kind of ascending pattern, and that's another thing where I feel like there's one element that like, hey, might actually be kind of interesting, but they hardly use it. Like that could be the identity of this version, and then they just like don't use it enough for it to be.
Yeah, it's so weird that they're saying this is from the Metal Gear Solid 5 version, which is I'd says make some bold moves, and this one actually just goes and clings to the Lulu cover so closely.
Yes, it's very strange.
Like, it's very strange. Like the bass line's very similar. It actually bears some similarity to the Johnny Cougar version, in that it's got that sort of upbeat, like fastness to it. This version does feel a little quicker.
Yeah, I think the other thing it has in common with the Johnny Cougar version is that it should have been 2.5 minutes.
Yeah, that's what it should have.
I don't know.
Sure.
This one got boring. I don't fully understand why. Like it's shorter than the Lulu version, but I feel like they just ran out of steam.
Well,
even though it's basically the same.
Yeah.
I don't really know how that works out, but that's how I felt.
You don't need a worse version of the Lulu version.
Yeah, it's not much going on here.
Really not a lot. There's some hand drumming and kit drumming again, which I think is also in the Lulu version. Yeah, this is just a carbon copy with worse elements.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty much it.
That's it. Now let's talk about another piece of garbage, Unsound Americans in 2016 as well.
Unsound Americans.
We passed upon the stair. We spoke of was and when. Oh.
Again, and this is also Blackberry Lily, whomstever that may be.
I forgot to look up Blackberry Lily.
I couldn't find him. I know I've listed this as another unknown product of the early Bowie mornings because this is 2016.
Yeah, this is also 2016. The opening definitely has a different sound to it, and that was like when I made this playlist. That was kind of what I was looking for because I didn't want.
They'll trick you, dog.
Those
openings will trick you.
Because they sounds quite different. Because everything is on strings. It's playing the intro riff on strings or synth strings.
Mm-hmm.
But this one is very like string based.
Yeah, it's it really is, and then like a children's choir.
It definitely has like the vocals don't sound super produced.
Mm-hmm.
Or like heavily professional necessarily.
Or heavily performed either. It's
they feel more amateurish.
Yeah. So you're right. It is this like violin. We get what sounds like a child to me singing, and some backup ooze.
Yeah, it's a lot of backup ooze.
Yeah, on the chorus you get some sort of plucked violin as well, along with the upwards riff being performed on the violin.
Yeah,
You get this
that
ding,
and the
ding, 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 ding,
pizzicato,
ding, ding, ding.
to use
Yeah,
vocabulary.
a little pizzicato.
Bloop, bloop, bloop.
Uh, yeah, it's all very predictable and super fucking boring.
Yeah, it's a very kind of, I don't even know. I was gonna try to describe it as something. I
It reminds
think
me
this
of
one. Oh, sorry.
like it reminds me of, I think the group is Scala, Scala, who's just like those two brothers who like work a children's choir, and we've done
Oh
their
yeah,
version of
those
like
guys.
Black
Yeah,
Hole's Sun. It's like that but without a full children's choir.
yeah. I did think like I liked the outro. It was just a lot of like a lot of vocal layers and strings.
Yeah,
But
I
I
mean that's a
think that's
smart move.
pretty much all it had going for it.
Yeah, I mean it was too long a journey to get there.
It is, yeah. This one, similar to the previous one, kind of runs out of steam. It's also almost a full minute. It's 50 seconds longer than the previous one, so it's on the
Yeah.
longer side. It probably wouldn't have had to have been, or they could have done some more to make it interesting.
Yeah. That's all there is to be said about this one. And
Yeah.
with that, we're going to get into our final verdicts, Alex. We got
Final
3 categories
verdicts.
today. We got the worst version, we've got the best version, and we've got the version that would play when you encountered your other self. When you encounter a man upon the stair who isn't really there.
All right.
Alex, worst version. We
Worst
got a
version.
strong running in the last
Yes,
2 or 3
those
here.
last, because yeah, I mean, there's all the ones that I had to have on here, and then I was like filling it out, and it didn't go great. But worst version, I think, for me is Thin White Ziggy. It is perplexing, and it is also fairly boring.
Yeah. It's bad. Its only advantage, and the only reason I won't be giving it worst version, is that it's a minute shorter than Unsound Americans. Which was just
That it is.
drivel. I think it is important to have these two on because they speak to a larger picture of the David Bowie scene, which is the after death like worship.
Right.
And so there is just this churning out of covers and performances from artists small and large, and the quality is in such high variance that it's, we've gone from these very genuine versions at the start where it's like, I like this song, I'm gonna cover it, where it's like, oh, we gotta get it. It feels a little insincere to be like, oh, we gotta get in on this because Bowie's dead, so now it's important to do this. The same way that like every Canadian became a Tragically Hip fan once Gordon Lightfoot died. No, just kidding. Gordon Downey.
Gordon Downey. Gordon Lightfoot, still alive.
Still
Impressively.
alive.
He's quite old.
He is super old.
I better
Well, yeah,
not
it
like
is-
check the news and see tragedy.
Yeah,
Anyway,
well, that already happened once. He was erroneously reported dead.
that's
so.
true.
But yeah, I think it speaks to the modern scenario of covers for famous artists who die, is that people just churn them out in this such an insincere way that Thin White Ziggy and Unsound Americans don't even really exist. They're not an actual group.
That's true. They don't seem to have a profile.
Yeah, so it is quite odd. They're both shitty. I'm gonna give it to Unsound Americans. Let's flip this. Alex, what's the best version of this?
What is the best version? I think for me, Midge is the best version. The best cover.
I agree.
I think the Nirvana version is solid, but for me, it's not the best. And Lulu is interesting, but again, for me, it's not the best.
Not the best.
And those are really the ones that are in the running. For
yeah, it really comes
So-
down to those 3, right?
yeah, of those 3, it's got to be Midge. It's longer,
Yeah, and I
but
think
that's just my,
Mhm.
my sensibilities are more mid 80s post punk
Yeah, I
electronic music
suppose.
than they are Nirvana. At least
But
they
I
are
feel like
today.
Midge in his song grabs what's good about the Lulu version, which is predominantly that sax riff,
Which is
and he grabs
again more Bowie.
which is more Bowie, and he grabs what's good about the Nirvana version, which is also just what's good about the original, and he puts those two together and does it in like an 80s electronic post-punk context, which is I think really meshes with the song and that haunting space very well. I think it is just solid.
Yeah. So I mean, it was also like the version curated by Hideo Kojima to be in Metal Gear Solid 5.
That's right.
So like it was already kind of vetted by someone who we at least partially agree with the tastes of.
Yeah, he's got good fucking taste. Big fan of his games. Big fan of him being a fucking weirdo. Uh,
Yeah.
that's my glowing review of Hideo Kojima. I liked Death Stranding, so I'm on that side of history for people who need to know.
Yeah, for
I thought it
people
was a good
that
game.
means anything too. Like
Yeah. Yeah, I thought it was fucking awesome, and I mean he does that shit all the time. He just fills games with music he likes. He did that with Metal Gear Solid 5: Phantom Pain. He did that with Death Stranding, where half the time you're walking around, he's like, "You ever hear this band?" And you're like, "No, I haven't." He's like, "They're pretty fucking cool." You're like, "All right, sounds pretty good. Thanks,
as far
Hideo."
as I can tell, he kind of wanted to do it earlier on, but it was more difficult.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, so that's the best one. Midge. Do you think it's? Yeah, it's gotta be.
I
I'm
don't
not
know
gonna
what
ask
it
about the
is.
last name.
I don't know.
Don't
how to
need to
say it.
know. Alex, you encounter a man upon the stairs who's not really there. This sounds like an old text adventure. What cover version's playing?
Wait. So the person's not there.
Well, yeah, but
So do I encounter someone or not?
I know we're all asking that.
I don't know if I have like a good response for this one.
Alex, this is really just a wild card pick.
Yeah, this is a wild card pick. It's John Mellencamp because I'm in the Heartland, baby. I have no idea.
No, you've locked it in with John Mellencamp. I'm going with
Yep.
Lulu because if I encounter a guy, it's gonna be crazy.
Is that a Lulu reference?
No, it's just because that saxophone's pretty wild. That's all I got.
Oh, okay. Then you say down at Lulu. Bum, 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 bum.
Bum, bum, bum. If I knew anything off that Metallica / Lou Reed album, I'd plug that in
Lulu.
right here.
I'm singing Lulu down at Lulu by Ohio Express. That's a pretty good song.
That's Japanese for Good Morning Express.
Oh, hi, Express.
Alex, that's our opinions.
Yeah.
Y'all got different opinions, similar opinions. Hit us up on Twitter. #CoverMePod. @JakeTheCressy. @SomeAlexWiseGuy. Be sure to rate and review us. We're on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts. Apple Podcasts is actually what it is, not iTunes. But, I'm old. Apple Podcasts. Fucking review us there. Tell everybody how good we are. Tell your friends about us. Send us questions at covermepod@gmail.com. Send us comments, concerns, suggestions for the future. We're coming up to the end of this month, which y'all know what that means. It's no more Bowie songs ever again until next year. Maybe we'll probably throw some.
Or like
We'll
at some point. It's not like I mean, I don't think I could not talk about Bowie again.
It's gonna happen, people.
It'll happen.
But this is
We'll
the end
take
of
a
our
break.
formal discussion. It's been a blast. With that, we're gonna go into our bonus segment. Alex, it's been 5 years since David Bowie died.
It has.
How are you holding up?
Pretty well. Pretty well. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's unfortunate. I always wanted to see David Bowie live, and I was
Mhm.
hoping that he would tour some more. I even speculated that it might happen for Black Star. That got shot down pretty quick. But I don't want to dwell too long on the death of celebrities, because I think that he did provide us with a lot of material, and I'm still enjoying it. And it's, like I said, unfortunate there won't be more, but I really do appreciate what exists. And in addition to that, I had a dream several years before he died that he did die. Like, he died in my dream. Like, he wasn't there, but there was a thing. There was an announcement. David Bowie died. And then I kind of woke up and, like, in my groggy state, couldn't remember if it was reality or not, and just got really sad. So I went through
You had a test run.
the experience of David Bowie has died several years before, And then, yeah, I already had gone through it once. And then when it really happened, I was kind of prepared somehow.
That's fortunate.
Yeah.
I only once had a dream with David Bowie where he was in sort of his like Ziggy Stardust stuff where he's got the big like third eye,
Mm-hmm.
and we just sat in a movie theater together and we held hands and watched a movie. It's pretty dank,
That's an
but
interesting
did not prepare me
dream.
for his death. Yeah, it's been a wild ride these past 5 years. That's the only celebrity death that's really shook me up. Like I get bummed out when especially in this past year, there's been so many musicians that have died. You know, what's his face from the Cars. You got Neil Peart who passed. You got the guy from Fountains of Wayne. Clearly, I'm not that attached to them because I can't remember any of their names. But
Names on the spot, not a good thing.
yeah, not a good thing. But like, yeah, those all kind of hit, and I was like, like a lot of good ones are leaving. But yeah, David Bowie hit the hardest, and I think for a time I couldn't even listen to David Bowie music because I was just like, oh, it's all over. But this year and with this month, I've really come back to it and been diving into different Bowie albums and re-listening to stuff and been like, oh, I actually really like this, and I can listen to it and not be totally bummed out. And I watched the Lazarus musical. Yeah, it's been a good year for Bowie for some reason. It's just been
Yeah,
real
well,
nice.
I'm glad you worked through whatever you needed to process.
Yeah, I am glad as well. Yeah, that's really it. I didn't have a bonus segment planned. We're just wrapping up Cover Bowie. I think I forgot to call it Cover Bowie, and that's my biggest regret this month as I've been
Well,
very
I mean,
inconsistent in using
You
the
probably
branding name.
remembered. You probably remembered at the start of the intro, but by the end, I mean, it was
Oh,
so
God,
long.
it was so fucking long. Jesus Christ. Yeah, and so that's it. That's the episode. Tell us what you thought about Cover Bowie. Tell us what you think about David Bowie in general. Tell us where you were on the day David Bowie died so we can prove that you didn't kill him. That's it. As we always say on Cover Me, oh no, not Cover Me. We never lost control.